I'll be reintroducing this. Yeah, this is the AMA. I already started and forgot to hit record. So, for those of you tuning in on YouTube, once I post this, post the link to this, if it seems like I'm picking up midstream, that's why. Anyway, I'm answering a question about the Equinox. Skip Cutlass commandeered that vessel from the Royal Fleet in there's a city called Balstock in the north of Jalra. It's a relatively recent addition. So if you're looking on the old world map and it's not there, that's why. But yeah, Balstock, he commandeered a royal vessel and made it into the Maimed Dame, and did the whole piratey thing. He had it festooned with skulls and stuff like that, as silly pirates do. But yeah, down the line, Vitrice ended up on his ship, and she basically, slowly, over time, poisoned his mind. That's one of the reasons Skip is a little unhinged, really. She convinced him to let her take command of the ship, and he took command of the newer vessel that he had just taken over. That's the one that you guys encountered him on, actually. And then she simply killed everyone else on board and sailed away, and ended up, after many adventures of her own, twisting and torturing, she ended up in Southport with that brothel there. So yeah, that's how you guys came upon the Maimed Dame. And yeah, then you guys, took it upon yourselves to, change it from that gaudy pink that it was to because like Vitrice redecorated as well. So you guys changed it into the blue and gray ship that it is now. A little worn, sure, but that's just lived in, so to speak. So yeah, that's about the Equinox. Let me see other questions. Let me field these. Go into the group page here. I know there was something about how Shub got bored and there was some question about how Shub ended up under that mushroom. Now, if you recall, that particular cave, what led you to there, is what led Vitrice into there. The magic actually was calling to you. You heard music kind of leading you into that cave. And that was the same thing that led Shub into that cave as well. And the mushrooms in particular caused you to kind of dwell upon regrets and sadness. Oh, how'd he get out of the through the magical maze? Oh, no, Joel's just repeating the question. Okay, yeah, that's how. He got called by the magic into there, and it so happened that he actually came into there shortly after Vitrice did, so the magic door that you had to read Celestial to get to open was still open, and he followed her in. And so, actually Vitrice and Shub were there at the same time, but the effects that the mushrooms had was drastically different. Vitrice slowly went crazy and started tearing into herself, and Shub instead, how we all take disappointment differently? Well, Shub internalized it, and he sat down and just kind of wallowed in his regret to the point of just kind of passing out from exhaustion. And that's when you guys happened upon him. So Vitrice hadn't been there very long, but long enough for the mushrooms to work their effect on a really old, really powerful mind. And so yeah, Shub had been under a magically induced, mushroom-induced sleep or exhaustion for, by that point, probably a couple weeks. Thankfully, it slowed his metabolism down to a point where he hadn't starved yet, but yeah, that's that's when you guys happened upon him. Now the other question had to do with the other cave. Was there any loot missed? And that is an interesting question. Let me see here. So, if the second cave, there was a point at which you clearly were not in the physical realm anymore, or the realm you guys knew, where there was that starship that you happened upon, and you ended up sailing towards that constellation of Orion. Well, I forget which one of you, but one of you did look below deck, but you didn't roll high enough to find anything. If you had succeeded in your roll, there was a cloak down there that you would have found, but it was hidden. So that was one bit of loot that you had missed. That's like in the first cave, in the endless hallway, there actually was a hidden little alcove there with a treasure chest in it as well. So, yeah, always be mindful, always be checking, and you won't get every single bit of treasure, but just know that I do hide Easter eggs like that throughout the maze. It's not a video game where, like, all of your rewards come at the end. Yeah, there's always bits and pieces here and there for you to pick up that might even help you through the maze that you're dealing with. So, yeah, let me see. Other questions. How did Chubb get under the question? Any loot in the cave that where was there any loot in the cave where Alon was? Well, yeah, that was the second cave. In the temple itself, most of the loot had been found by the parrots, and there is a cache in the jungle still. So it's possible that Alon would have happened upon that eventually, but so it's possible that Alon has access to other things, not crossbows, because crossbows are a fairly new technology in the world. So, but yeah, that's definitely a possibility. Let me see. I actually run 2 separate games in the world of Ashra. There's the open table group, and then I run a game for my daughters as well. And yeah, my daughter Jazzy had asked something as well. I'm trying to find it here. Feel free to fire away with any other questions while I'm looking for that question. Oh yeah, what do you do if your character dies? Now that's something she hasn't had to deal with yet, because they actually just finished their first quest. But what you do if your character dies? Well, first of all, you can when your character drops to 0, your character goes unconscious. If they drop to your hit point value negative, then your character dies. Or if and also when your character drops to 0, you're making death saves, and if you fail 3 death saves, your character dies. Also, if an opponent were to come up and strike you, that is something they call the coup de grace, which is basically an instant kill. If they want to do that, if they want to instantly kill you, they can, because you're helpless. You can't defend against it or anything like that. In any of those cases, if you are well and truly dead, then there are a few options. For lower level characters, there are fewer options. Because you just don't have the powers, you don't have the money to do any of the following. But for higher level players that have a little more capability, there are spells that you can use to bring people back. There are temples that you can take the individual to bring them back, provided there's a body to revive them into. There's also a full-on resurrection where, like, even if you don't have a body, you can bring them back. But that is a very high-level spell. But beyond all that, if you don't have the means of bringing the dead character back, then what you do is you roll up a new character. And anytime you're creating a character, but especially if it's on the heels of a death, you absolutely want to talk to your DM about it. That way you can make sure to make sure that your character has ties to the world, and it also allows your DM to create ways that your character might be tied to the party in some way. That way it makes sense for the new character to actually join the party and continue to adventure with them. So that's what you do. In fact, really, for lower level characters, if you're level 10 or lower, I actually encourage my players to have a backup character. That way you don't bring your play to a halt if your character does die. And it's also not quite so heavy if your character dies, because, like, especially if you've only made one character, the first time it's always a long, hard process, and you're invested in that character, and so it hits hard when your character dies. And so, like, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if you knew you had a backup character as well that you're excited about. Let's see here. Can you tell us more of the background of Paris Tanner? Paris Tanner actually grew up in Southport. Yeah, she's been in Southport her entire life. In Southport's infancy, it didn't have much of a port, but yeah, she did grow up. Her father was a sailor that actually came to Southport by way of boat. At the time, Southport had like 2 docks, and that was it. And he was one of the first to start trading. His name was Jin Tanner, and yep. Actually, let me write that down. Jin Tanner was Paris's father. I've gotten to a point where I have so many NPCs that writing things down is a good idea. I have this written down somewhere, but I'm in the sabbatical that I'm going through. I intend to try to collect all this stuff into one place. Rem turned me on to something called Trello, and I'm trying very hard to put all of the info in there. And so if you haven't, I have shared a link in the Facebook page, the Facebook group, and if you haven't checked that out, please do. It's going to have, eventually, it's going to have all of the stuff on it. So yeah, pretty good reference. But yeah, Jin Tanner, he came to Southport, actually from Eastport, over on the continent of Yane, and he was bringing cattle. And he didn't want to compete with all of the cattle traders who were going to Baytown instead. And plus, that's a long, hard journey. And as you guys found out, there's that mysterious triangle that sometimes eats people. And so instead, he decided to go to Halfway and then on to Southport, because he had heard of a town there, and it was largely untouched because it was not recognized by the kingdom. And so he started going there, and his daughter just took over the business and made it into an empire, basically. Well, not an empire, but, a full-on business. So that's Paris's backstory. How did Twilight come into being? Twilight was created by the very first Deva. Actually, the very first Deva and also the Jinn. They all worked together to create this base of operations for the Deva to live and the Deva are meant to be living memories, living librarians of everything that goes on, and custodians of the world at large, which is what the Twilight Guard views themselves as. That they're protecting against, unknown threats, any strangers to the world, stuff like that. And so they function kind of like, excuse me, they function kind of like the Men in Black from the movie. If there's an extraterrestrial that shows up, they appear, and they're like, well, are you here on a peaceful mission, or why are you here? And if they deem it to be threatening, they kill it, and or send it on its way. And if they find that the person is here for some reason, then they try to help them on that so they can finish and be on their way. So that's what the Twilight Guard is for. And yeah, Twilight, it should go without saying that it takes a lot of magical power to create a city that's basically invisible, that's flying. So yeah, the stewards, which of the stewards that there are now, only 3 of them have been there from the beginning, and that's actually the Deva, the Ali, and the twin sisters, which I'm blanking on their name right now. The 2 Genasi that are now stewards, they came later. But yeah, the 3 Deva, they actually helped, and they worked with a very young and not deified Dargo to raise Twilight up into being. And there was also some jinn that had a hand in that before they kind of removed themselves from the world and went into hiding before the gods came through and stripped them of a lot of their power and imprisoned them in different objects. So yeah, that's how Twilight came into being. Stay tuned. I've been drawing a lot, and one of the things I've been working on is a map. A map of the world of Ashra from 2,000 years ago, which is actually when my other campaign, my girls' campaign, is happening. Some cities will be there that are just ruins for my open table folks, and then many other villages and towns won't be there at all. They won't have been established. Places that open table sees as cities are simple small towns. They haven't grown yet, stuff like that. But yeah, if you're curious to see what the world looked like 2,000 years ago, like I said, stay tuned. That'll be hitting the Facebook group. Who was that invisible character hassling Balthus Steelbeard? It wasn't an invisible character. It was, or if you're referring to the homunculus that created that curse, the cursed ground of his manor. Yeah, that wasn't a character per se. It was a homunculus of a Sahuagin, and now that's kind of coming home to roost. It turns out that someone with ties to the throne, or who's close to the throne, is somewhat nefarious, which is causing all the drama that I hinted at the right. Yeah. Basically, the homunculus that you saw was a Sahuagin sorcerer that didn't like the idea of the Sahuagin mixing with the dwarven sea folk, and he didn't like them meddling in dwarven politics, and so he was trying. Well, he also didn't like the idea of using curses like the consumption curse that was placed on Steelbeard, and well, I'm not going to go too much into what happened to him, like who did what, but suffice to say, the nefarious party killed him and stuffed his body and turned him into a homunculus, and in some sick, twisted irony, made him their tool to like continue to attack Steelbeard. So yeah, that's who was overseeing that cursed ground over the Steelbeard Manor. Balthus is now free of the curse, and now he's living happily in his rebuilding manor with his new wife. I want to say one of my third, my two campaigns. One is called the Stalwarts, which I coined. I would rather my players have come up with a name for the group, but just to give them a name for the stories, the summaries that I write and stuff, I just started calling them the Stalwarts. Neville or Narcy Vero? Because you say her there, Joel. I mean, I can tell you about both of them. Narcy Vero, her father was the first to, he actually founded the Baytown Gazette. As you can imagine, with the time period that we're in, basically like medieval period, literacy is not very high. And so like the idea of a publication was definitely definitely a new thing. And so yeah, her father, I'm trying to recall his name. I want to say it's Nash Vero. But yeah, he founded the Baytown Gazette, and at the time it was just a local publication that was passed around Baytown. But as trade opened up between the throne and Baytown, it started to get circulated through the island. Now you won't find the Baytown Gazette like in other parts of the world unless someone just took it with them. News spreads very slowly in a medieval world, so don't be surprised to find like years old papers like on your journeys that like some trader took with them and just kind of tried to share the news as best as they could, which was months old by the time. Neville Vero, I don't know if you recall, but Neville Vero actually does the Wide World of Ashra, and so he's also a journalist. Narcy got into the gig of like basically gossip rags. She would go around Baytown and share the local gossip as writing in her little editorials. So that's, she's like the daddy's girl. Like Nash still is the editor in chief, and he basically, to keep Narcy busy, so she didn't just run around gossiping and stirring up trouble. He hired her as a journalist, and like I said, she started doing the gossip column. But Neville Vero had a lust for travel, and so like he convinced Nash to like okay the Wide World of Ashra, and so he's traveling around, which again, travel is a slow process in the medieval world. So like as he gets to new places and he explores the place a bit, so he has something to actually write, he writes down what he's learned about a place and he gets it back to Baytown, and once it gets back to Baytown, then it's published. And so like he's written about Yane, he's written about Nice, and some of the other places as well, and he'll continue to write. They also have a correspondent that that the Veros have never met, but this guy who calls himself the Monster Hunter has started to write in about various creatures as well, and he's primarily like just cataloging a bestiary, so to speak, but he's doing it by way of letters to the Baytown, and they're like, oh well, here's content, and so they publish it. So yeah, there's the Monster Hunter as well. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah, I also had heard someone on my other group just ask for questions about like, I'm playing a warlock. Any hints, any suggestions, and the main suggestion there is warlocks are kind of like paladins in that your power source is from something outside of yourself. You are a conduit, and so lean into that. Like make figure out who your patron is and contact them, and like that can create a lot of interesting story elements and drama. Like your dialogue with your patron. Maybe like a paladin, you're really devout and you want to make them happy, so they give you more power. Or maybe you find out that there's some monster and you don't like that because you want to be a good guy, and that creates drama. So that's story wise, role play wise. That's a tip I would have for you as far as building the character. My main tip there is be consistent, because as you look through the warlock powers, you'll find that some powers are based off of constitution, and some are based off of charisma, and you will notice that there are certain builds in mind. And while, yes, you can pick outside of that, and there are synergies there, for the most part, you want to make a consistent build. So yeah, that's that. Let me see. How is Trey doing with the orphanage? How are those that live there doing? The orphanage is doing great. Sadly, every medieval village, the life expectancy is rather short in a medieval world, and so every village has no shortage of orphans, and as a result, the orphanage is quite full. And so like there's always going to be a need there, and there's always going to be perhaps things will be a little tight. There will be maybe shortage of beds, stuff like that. But since Trey is not just housing them, he's also providing training. He's getting apprenticeships with different tradesmen, stuff like that. Then these are youths that start contributing back to society and plugging in instead of just being a burden. And as a result, like that has provided that has led the community to invest back into the orphanage in a way that a lot of medieval towns would not do. If this same orphanage was in Baytown and not led by Trey, pushing for those apprenticeships and stuff like that, it wouldn't do as well. So, yeah, in medieval towns, oftentimes orphans were just adopted by a family, or they were beggars, they were thieves, stuff like that, and they had to look out for themselves. And usually they would starve to death or be caught and thrown in jail and then starve to death. But occasionally they'd just turn into incredible thieves that would be a terror to the local constabulary. But thankfully, Southport has a much better option, and yeah, I personally think that Southport is going to end up being a much safer, nicer place to live than a lot of the cities around them because of the orphanage. So yeah, the orphanage is doing great. Trey has started to court Eileen, and so those two are kind of an item. And yeah, Trey's doing good, the orphanage is doing good. And well, and also with Garouche coming in to do the Adventurers Guild, like potentially even more training, and for those orphans that still lean towards the more dangerous skills like thievery, like dungeoneering, like fighting, stuff like that. There's an outlet for them there, or there will be. So that's exciting to see. Trey and Eileen, yeah. Eileen has taken to being the head constable just fine. As far as changes, with the recent pirate attack, they are very painfully aware of, just how weak they were on their ports. Like, the idea of 4 ships showing up and just strangling their trade to nothing. And also at the time, you know, there wasn't really, as you guys may recall, there wasn't really a lot of support coming from the crown there either. So yeah, it was a matter of, okay, nobody's going to help us here. We need to help ourselves. And so as the party came back, they started to notice that there were real fortifications on the docks. Now, granted, you can't do much out in the water about that, but still, like, that's something they've made. There are cannons at the ready, and not only are there cannons, but they've started taking to training people with the cannons as well, because firing a cannon and aiming a cannon are not the same thing. So that's the main change that has happened. Cutting down on the number of orphans loose in the streets has cut down on a lot of the pickpocketing, and with Mecker turning over a new leaf, there's not a lot of the organized crime, shall we say, happening anymore. Although Mecker is keeping one foot in that world just enough to know if something bad's coming and to try and steer those influences away. So, yeah. The stalwart showing up in Southport was the pebble that started an avalanche. And it's not Gotham. They don't have to be Batman forever. The townsfolk are stepping up and recognizing that they can do better. Yeah, I was hoping that some of my other players would get in here and fire away any questions. Someone had asked in an offhand comment, just kind of wondering if there were any more Beast characters coming, and no, pretty much I'm cutting it off at what we have. There's a lot. We haven't even play tested the snake race, but yeah, between mice and Gila monsters and sea iguanas and wolves and cats and 2 different kinds of Kenku, there are plenty of beasts to play. Satyrs, minotaurs. So yeah, should you expect to see any other beasts? No, not really. I'm trying to keep it a little more manageable. Any news on what happened to the previous constable, Seamus Fletcher? Seamus Fletcher is a coward, and he was self-professed to be a coward, and so he wanted to get as far away from a town that actually expected something of its constable as he could. And so as a result, he fled north, and at first he went to Baytown and tried to find work there, and he did find work for a while, but let's face it, when you're used to being lazy in a medieval world, there's not a lot for you. And so he found himself out of work routinely, and then eventually begging, and then he he fled into the Shadewood, where he happened upon the wardens there, and he encountered a lot of tough love, where the wardens are like, okay, this is the wild. This is how we do things. We're all about nature here. So, either you put up or shut up and go away. And so that was something that, a character like him had never really been forced to confront himself. And so once he did that, he kind of grew up a bit. And so now, like, if the party were to journey north into the Shadewood, they would find a very changed Seamus, who is now a budding druid, roaming about with the wardens in the Shadewood. Bum, 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 bum. Um, by the way, for my players, I mentioned to some of you. Oh, what are the origins of the kingdom itself? Well, the kingdom of Beryl um, is a somewhat new kingdom. It's only like 200, 300 years old. Well, no, it's long older than that. I would say more like 500 years old. Basically, the dwarves originally like came to consciousness in the mountains of Yane, and they hadn't gone very far because, like, if you really similar to similar to Lord of the Rings dwarves, they went down instead of out. They were mountain people. They loved mining and everything in the mountain. But as the other races started to spread out and eventually trade with the dwarves, some of them got it in their head that there's more outside these mountains. And also they were tired of fighting with the orcs constantly and stuff like that. Because at the time, there was not peace between orcs and dwarves. And so that led some factions to seek opportunity outside the mountains. And the more they did that, the more they started to really get an interest in the world at large, and that started to that led to some dwarves even learning to sail, and dwarves are actually natural sailors. Now that's very different from like your Lord of the Rings dwarves, or even your traditional D&D dwarves. But yeah, some dwarves loved sailing, and since the mountain folk, as they came to be known, would never take to the sea, they knew that's an untapped opportunity out there, lots of potential. And so the ones that left the mountain, the ones that started to really seek their opportunities and their fortune elsewhere, started to call themselves the sea folk. And then the traditional dwarves that stayed in the what came to be known as the Ghost Mountains, before that the Dagger Range, those dwarves are they still refer to themselves as the mountain folk or the old folk. And it created a schism. And eventually, the sea folk found an island that was very lush and great for farmland, and then a particular character named Stone Shield, that was his family name, he discovered a huge vein of beryl, which is a kind of jewel, in one of the three mountains in the middle of the island, and that turned him into that elevated him from a low noble up to a lord in no time. And because he was so generous with the people around him, he had a natural charisma. People kind of hoisted him up to leadership all on their own. And then around that same time, the mountain folk were ousted from their kingdom, from Ironhold in the mountains, by, well, actually, a very young, very nefarious Vitrice with Delac at her wing. And yeah, they slaughtered and chased the dwarves out of their kingdom, which is what led them to Northgate, which after a long time of war and peace talks and stuff, there actually, if you went to Northgate, you would find orcs and dwarves living at peace with each other, and it's even a meritocracy. The most worthy person is the leader. Period. That's it. And it's what you do that defines your station, not your blood. And they learned that through a lot of hard lessons. Now, recently, they've rediscovered Ironhold is alive, is still there and ready. And so, the older dwarves are like, no, we need to go back and reclaim our throne, which is what led to the civil war that's been started as you guys came back to Southport. But yeah, Stone Shield, after buying a lot of influence, and after just gaining a lot of influence, he didn't buy it. Some people view it that way, especially the mountain folk. But the traditional kingdom of Ironhold falling, And him having all that support, basically he was elevated up to king. And so he was like, you know what? We need a king. The traditional throne has fallen. Why not create a kingdom here on this island that's kind of removed from all those troubles? And so the kingdom of Beryl was formed. He named it after his reason for success. And so yeah, that's how the kingdom of Beryl came to be. But yeah, just FYI, I'm not going to run this video too much longer. I don't want it to be so huge that it would take a lot to put it up on YouTube. But this has been a lot of fun fielding these questions. And of course, if you have any other questions, by all means, leave them in the comments, and I will field those in writing, in the comments as well. I think it's kind of cool to see, what you guys want to know about this world, what you want to know about different races, playing D&D, what the DMing process is like, stuff like that. But yeah, I try to be an open book as far as I can be. If you ask me story things that are coming down the pike, I'll tell you spoilers and leave it at that. But otherwise, I will answer your questions. What was Southport like prior to the reign of the Hags, and perhaps its origins? Well, Southport was an offshoot amongst the sea folk. There were still some that still remembered their roots in the mountains, and some feel as though Stoneshield did buy his way into power, and they thought it was, they called him usurper and stuff like that, and some were very outspoken about that. And some were the Steelbeards, and some were, what was that other family? Something Sword. Suffice to say, there were 3 different families that were like the loudest voices among the sea folk against the throne of Beryl, or rather specifically against Stoneshield being on the throne. And since they were the minority, they were largely outcast. It started by them being just, social pariahs, but then eventually they were like, you know what? Fine. We're going to go make our own city. You can have your Baytown. You can have your castle if you want. We don't want it. Instead, we're going to carve out our own little fortune down here. And so they went and founded Southport. And, it started very slowly, being disconnected from the kingdom, because the kingdom was more than happy to let them just go off and do their own thing and not be connected at all. And so yeah, it grew very slowly as it collected more people that felt that they were outcast from the royal society at large. And whenever you have a a group of people, a village, and then a town, and then a city made up of people who consider themselves outcast, or maybe engaged in behaviors that made them outcasts, it lends itself to a certain demographic of people that, Southport became known not only as an outcast city, but also a crime-ridden, horrible place that you don't want to go, and it was that way for generations. And yeah, that's how it came to be. Now it's since turned around. There was only one hag that was... She definitely had her fingers in the underbelly, the criminal underbelly, but she didn't rule Southport. She just was taking advantage of Southport to cause as much pain as possible. So, yeah, but yeah, I'm going to cut it off there, I think. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. A quick reminder to my players, when we start up in March, be sure to have your characters up to level 10. Okay, and if you have any questions about like, well, how should I do that? What feats should I look at? Stuff like that. Again, I try to be an open book, so shoot me any questions or come talk to me at Open Table. January, I will be doing childcare. This month, Open Table falls on Christmas. We're not playing on Christmas. And January, I'm doing childcare. All of the leadership kind of rotates through and helps with the children. And then February, I'm planning to do a build your character, build a character at level 1 sort of workshop. So, those of you who don't have backup characters, that might be something to take advantage of. So yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed being your DM these past years, and I look forward to season 4. And the map is just one thing I have planned. Just stay tuned. We have a civil war to do, maybe some returning threats. Spoilers. But yeah, a lot of intrigue and mystery coming. So I'll talk to you all later, and you have a wonderful weekend. How do we end the video? End live video. There we go. Okay.